Hello, everyone. I am Claudiu Murgan, the host of the Spiritual Inspire podcast. Welcome to a new episode. If you want to support the channel, please visit www.spiritualinspired.ca. My guest today is Lauren Schneider. Lauren, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm honored to be here.
You are an innovator in the field of tarot readings and psychology, and we'll touch on that. But I would like to start by asking you, how did you transition from the movie industry where you started your career into psychotherapy?
Oh, that's an interesting story. I was a film theorist. I was trained in semiology, which is a way of looking at images and stories in film through the lens of psychotherapy. So this kind of interweaving of image and psychotherapy has always been my passion. But I went into film production and was working on Ripley's Believe It or Not. And I had a couple of crazy producers, and people were depressed on my team. And I guess I wasn't really aware of it, but they were lining up at my office, and I was talking to them, counseling them. Um, and a woman who didn't know me very well, who was on the show, one day we were in the hallway talking, and this woman, Linda Bazell, said to me, "You know, you ought to be a therapist." And it just caught me in one of those moments. I did not like the way people treated each other in film. I had been training with a psychotherapist. I went from being in psychotherapy to being a protege. I'd been training in hypnotherapy. And she just caught me in one of those moments, and I left the show. And then a whole bunch of synchronicities happened that led me to go back to school.
And I think that type of behavior hasn't changed much in the movie industry since you left.
Unfortunately, no. No, I actually, Linda and I started a group at that time called Hollywood Anonymous, or Ha 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 for short. And it was
Hmm.
how to survive in the film industry. And it didn't mean getting out of it, but for me, leaving it was hard because I loved the teamwork. I love film. I thought that that was a creative field, but I have to say I've never been more creative since I left and began to follow my own path.
Yes, and at the same time, I'm amazed that still a lot of young people want to go into the movie industry. They are still attracted to buzzwords and the fame and money, and they still don't understand there is, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but it's not too much substance behind all that facade. And they, again, they go like they're attracted to the light, like mosquitoes to the light. And they don't learn from the experience of those who went through this type of um, trauma and the ups and downs. And yes, they had the money, they had the fame, but at one point I think they drew the line and summarized their life and said maybe it wasn't worth it that much because there's no substance behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true for a lot of people. And I also want to say on the other side that we all have stories within us, and we're drawn to that medium in order to creatively tell our stories. It's just, and I know many, many people. I have dear friends, my husband as well, who have spent their lifetime in the industry and have had it be very fulfilling, not necessarily with fame and fortune, but with the ability to have extraordinary experiences among other creatives and to tell stories. Unfortunately, many people don't get to tell their own stories in the film industry. They end up just having to be in service of somebody else's dream, somebody else's vision. And that can be fulfilling, and it can also be pretty empty.
Yes. I mentioned at the beginning that you are an innovator and you came up with the term Tarotpy, which is an innovative approach to spiritual psychotherapy. Can you please expand on that?
Well, yes, absolutely. I'll pick up where I left off with the story. I left film having absolutely no idea what I was going to do. And that summer, I was unemployed, staring out to space in a psychic bookstore. And somebody walked up to me, a stranger walked up to me, as if we had a rendezvous. He began to talk to me, and he was telling me about this yellow book that he was holding. And he was saying that this is a book of wisdom. The Chinese studied nature in such detail that they understood the laws of the universe, and that these patterns and laws go through everything. They're connected to our relationships, our politics, the environment, everything. And he said, if you were to study this, you would understand how much change is in somebody's back pocket. And at the end of this 10-minute conversation, this man handed me his cherished traveling companion
Hmm.
and said, you're supposed to walk with this. And it was the book of the I Ching, Chinese Book of Wisdom. I had absolutely no idea what it was, but I did see that there was a foreword by Carl Jung, and I was very interested in psychology. So I thought, if this man takes this seriously, maybe I could learn about it. And 2 weeks later, the same thing happened with the man showing me tarot cards. And he said the same thing, you're supposed to walk with it. So this time I got the man's name. His name is Gary. And I asked Gary if he would just meet with me every few weeks and show me how to use the tarot and the I Ching. He didn't teach me anything about the tarot tradition. He didn't teach me anything about the I Ching's tradition. He just encouraged me to pull a card and to associate to it. What did it mean to me? And he taught me how to throw a hexagram and to associate to the words, which are metaphors. And I heard myself having a very deep voice and saying, you know, I need to sit on my butt for 2 months and I'll know what to do at the end of it. And at the end of those 2 months, I applied for a master's program in psychotherapy without the usual anxiety I would have in filling out an application. And I walked into a master's in psychology with the tarot tucked in one pocket and the I Ching in the other, still having no idea what these divination tools were or what to do with them. So I simply began to experiment. I was deeply interested in the language of the unconscious. Again, since I had studied through film, studied film through the lens of psychology. I was interested in the creativity of the unconscious. I was interested in tapping into the depth and wisdom of the unconscious. I had always been interested in dreams. And unfortunately, this mystery and depth of the unconscious was missing from the curriculum. So I kind of wandered out into my own lane and began to experiment. What happens if I apply psychotherapy to playing with the cards? What happens if I apply hypnotherapy, family systems, dream work to these images? And so I began to experiment. And what would happen was I would have more information, I would have a more profound experience with a person, revealing what was going on for them in one session, having profound shifts with them in one session, then would take months to years of regular psychotherapy. And it kept inspiring me so that I couldn't stop.
So how is that different from in terms of process and questions being asked in a session with a client? I mean, do you have a different approach than a psychotherapist or from a regular tarot reading?
Your questions are wonderful. So let me take those two questions separately. One thing I discovered when I did my master's thesis in using tarot and I Ching as tools of psychotherapy, I did a workshop on tarot for the class. And by accident, I'd brought 8 decks. And just to show people that there are decks from every country in the world, that these symbols and images are universal. And I asked somebody to volunteer, and since I had 8 decks, to pick a deck, which she did. And the images that she picked happened to be Greek instead of the usual images of the sun. And in the sun card, it was the Parthenon, well, her family was Greek, and this was more meaningful to her. And that's what I discovered almost by accident, the way that the universe puts its 2 cents in when we have an accident. Um, and I discovered that if people pick the deck, they will have more emotional resonance with it, and the synchronicities will be more accurate. And so I'm not doing what a tarot reader is doing. Tarot reader will usually have one deck. Traditionally, it's the Rider Waite deck. I'll show an image of that. And it's the tarot reader holds the deck, the tarot reader shuffles the cards, and then the tarot reader will interpret what that means for somebody and oftentimes do predictive interpretations. Now, a good tarot reader is worth their weight in gold. I have respect for that psychic ability, but I'm using it within the context of psychotherapy. So I'm very careful not to go toward predictions. And I'm asking the person to choose a deck. I'm asking the person, how many cards do you need to see? So a therapist, a therapy session will look very similar in some ways, in that somebody will come in concerned about something. I'll begin to talk to them about what they're concerned about. I'll ask them to lay that out for me. And then I will ask them to take a deep breath and focus inward and ask themselves, how many cards do they need to see? How are they laid out in their mind's eye? What's the meaning of each placement? So, what I'm doing is I'm counseling somebody's unconscious. I'm asking somebody's unconscious what their inner map is. And we're laying that inner map on the table. And in my experience, that goes right to the heart of the issue. And it goes a lot deeper than having a conversation just from our conscious understanding of what's going on. So it'll bring the images themselves. I don't approach images with a preconceived idea. Again, that's different than a tarot reader who would understand perhaps the Four of Swords in a certain way. I'm approaching the images like we would a dream, and I'm asking the client, what does this bring up for you? What is this? I'm pointing out details and saying, what does this dictator in this image bring up for you? And the client will say, well, my dad was a dictator. And then we're into the story that's more important for them. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
And why I say it's interesting because you are avoiding to put your energy, as you said, preconception into the cards and influence the outcome. Is like what we do with, and I tell everyone, with the words and the water. The moment we put out our intention through the words, that's a vibration, a resonance that goes into the wall. But if the client imbues the cards with his own or her vibration, then there is no influence from your side or external influence, but only their own. And that's very interesting indeed.
Yes. And there is, as I said, this is a way of petitioning the deeper psyche, the unconscious, which I think is a vast resource of wisdom. I believe that we have a wisdom within us that is boundless because, like dreams, when we're sleeping, when we're tapping into the unconscious in a semi trance state, there are no boundaries in time or space. And so that the wisdom is coming from the unconscious of the client. I am an interpreter. I will reflect to them also what I see in the cards. I will offer my reflections. But what's important is what resonates for them. And again, I find that that we're inviting also this universal consciousness into the room because there is this thing of synchronicity. There's this uncanny way in which they pick exactly the deck and exactly the card for what's going on. And I'm not in control of that session. I am an apprentice or I am in service to that deeper wisdom that is within them and within higher consciousness.
So now I understand why you asked me if I have a deck. So it's a prerequisite for working with you.
Mostly, yes. It's the easiest way over Zoom. I mean, if you come to my office, you would see that there's about 40 decks here to choose from. But if we're working on Zoom, I would ask you to have your own deck. And sometimes people don't. So, we've learned to get kind of scrappy over Zoom, do what we can. And so I will then show people my decks and ask them to pick one of mine, and then I will shuffle and they will tell me where to stop. But I truly do prefer that your energy and your agency be in choosing these cards.
Yes. So, Lorraine, how do you choose your decks, and do you clean them or clearing them after a while?
Oh, that's such a good question, and I'm probably remiss in doing that. I don't tend to do the tarot rituals. Typical tarot reading, you would not have somebody else touch your deck. You would clean it. You would hold it usually in a velvet case. Um, I have all my decks on display. I have people pick up my decks. Um, I generally haven't had to cleanse my office or my cards. There have been instances over this 40 years that I've been doing psychotherapy, whether it's traditional psychotherapy or therapy or dream work, where I might want to cleanse because something so dark has come in. But generally, no. I find that the ritual, the practice itself of doing therapy, as well as dream work, is a sacred ritual and it holds the material, even if it's very difficult material. That's another reason I went toward doing therapy because as a therapist, if somebody came in with something really traumatic, such as their child tried to commit suicide, I, as a therapist, am going to feel that anxiety and feel like I need to somehow find a way of helping them around this, healing them, fixing them. I carry that sense of over responsibility. But when I do therapy and dream work, it isn't the same. I really trust that there's a larger process happening here. And I surrender that over sense of responsibility. And I just track the process and I really trust Psyche and this whole process unfolds. So the therapy practice really does hold all the material that's there, no matter how difficult, dark, um, traumatic it might be. And it moves us into a different place. It moves us into a higher consciousness.
Yes, because I think we all have to get to that level at one point in our existence. And is there another story behind the Tarotpy name? I mean, you got a nudge to get the deck, you got a nudge to get the I Ching. Did you get another one to just combine the two, or it just came to you like a normal extension of what you've been doing?
Um, so I truly have to say, I do love your questions. You're a wonderful conversationalist. To tell you the truth, well, at first, when I started doing tarot therapy, right after school, I kept it separate from my regular practice. I thought that my license might be burned at the stake, metaphorically. So I did keep it separate initially. And then I kept having such profound experiences and such beneficial sessions with it that I quickly integrated it. And so the name therapy just popped to mind for me. It's like tarot therapy seemed to just lend itself to therapy. To tell you the truth, I thought it was kind of a cute, funny name at the beginning. I think I was just being a little bit goofy,
Playful.
playful. But playful is also part of this practice. And playing with cards was the way that I was experimenting. And I think play needs to be a part of psychotherapy. We come in with such attachment to deep trauma or problems. And what we're wanting to do is to stimulate imagination and play. So therapy was very playful at the beginning. And then I didn't realize until maybe 10 years later that this was the perfect term and I copyrighted it pretty quickly. And I incorporated it pretty quickly into my regular therapy practice. The I Ching, um, I teach my clients, I teach friends, I teach everyone how to do the I Ching, anyone interested. I use it sometimes with clients, but I prefer that I teach them and they learn how to have a dialogue with it because I can't teach them to resonate with it. I can teach people um, how to do it, excuse me, how to obtain a hexagram. I can't teach exactly how to resonate with the words, but I can work with them on it. Therapy really became my practice. And again, I do train people in therapy. I actually um, got approved by the licensing board in 2014 and then again in 2021 to be a CE provider. So I train therapists in doing therapy. And I think this is important cutting edge work um, because people are now asking therapists to incorporate divination. I've run way beyond your question, but if I can keep going,
Please.
we've come to a time where science and mysticism are being integrated. Quantum physics is showing us through experimentation exactly what the ancients have known for centuries about how everything is connected and how the observer actually affects the field. And what I've discovered through therapy, not because I believed this at the beginning, but because I'm an empiricist and it's taught me this through observation, that there is no separation between psyche and matter. There is no separation between our thoughts and our consciousness and the cards we're dealt in life. You can see the direct connection over and over again. And sometimes it's so uncanny that we have to start to see that there's this connection between what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and these cards I randomly draw. So I think that there's something very important about us needing to integrate science and mysticism now because our sense of reality as just material is not sustainable. We're having tremendous anxiety that uh, existential crises with climate change, with socio-political upheaval. And we need to understand that there are forces greater than ourselves and greater than the smallness of what we feel in our human structures or the helplessness we're feeling in our human structures. And so we need a deepening.
Yes, and I'm really happy that your association understood the advantages and was open enough to allow you to bring this practice into what you are doing, and also encouraging other psychotherapists to learn from you. Because nowadays, during my talks to other specialists, their associations are quite fixated on old terms and ideology, and they won't allow anything new. And the only solution for them is to renounce their or give away their practice or license. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate because we need healers and we have a lot of we have a lot of heightened anxiety and depression out there. Certainly, it has accelerated since COVID. And part of the issue is we're facing existential crises that therapists are not trained to deal with. They're trained to deal with, childhood trauma and how the threads of childhood trauma really are carried into our current lives. I don't think that most therapists are even trained in ancestral trauma and historical trauma, which is truly what we're dealing with right now in America and all over the world. We're dealing with the ghosts of the past. So, dream work and therapy will bring up these deeper uh, lineages and also bringing a higher power, bringing divination tools, bringing a higher consciousness into our work as therapists so that it's so much bigger than us as a person. I couldn't solve these issues by myself. but to invite this higher consciousness into how do we hold these existential problems, um, gives me a way to be present. And yeah, I'm not, the way you asked the question really touched me in terms of I pioneered this, but I didn't invent it. I apprenticed myself to these divination tools I was handed and to experimenting, and I apprenticed myself to it, and it taught me. And in truth, working with dreams and therapy taught me depth psychotherapy. I was not trained. I was trained as a family systems therapist, understanding systemic. That's been incredibly helpful to understand systems and patterns. But the depth of the work was not taught to me. It was taught to me by being willing and curious, infinitely curious, to keep practicing this method.
Yes, and the
So
wise
I'm
ones,
grateful.
yeah, the wise ones before us always said that if you can imagine something, it means that it's already in existence somewhere in the consciousness, and all we have to do is to go and grab it. And at the same time, multiple people will imagine the same aspect or the same technology, the same healing approach, and that's why we can see that it spreads all over the world very fast.
And that's what's
Mm.
happening. I mean, when I started doing therapy in 1983, I just got rolled eyes from colleagues. I didn't know there was a thing called spiritual psychotherapy at the time, and I wasn't reaching out beyond my world to know it. But in 2017, the New York Times, Psychology Today, Scientific American published articles that clients are asking their therapist to include divination tools, and tarot and psychology are trending. And it's just, the timing is extraordinary to me. It is happening all over the world, it's exploding. And again, I think that this is the wisdom of our intuitive mind going toward what we need, which is something mystical and larger than ourselves, but also images. You were just saying that, we have the ability to envision something, and if we can envision it, it's already there. Well, images are our earliest language. I just went to the caves in called Peshmar in the south of France, and I was looking at cave paintings from 30,000 years ago, and this is how people both expressed themselves and communicated with each other. Images are our maternal language, and images also stimulate imagination so that we can perhaps envision something way beyond what our rational mind can. And we need to.
Yes. And talking about imagination, you also developed another term, imaginal ecotherapy. What is that, please?
So, well, again, ecotherapy is a new cutting edge therapy that is addressing our relationship with the environment. The idea of ecotherapy is that we can't be healthy if we're disconnected from our environment and if we're continuing to try to colonize our environment. We know that that's, again, not sustainable. And so ecotherapy is a way of helping people to connect to nature. It's quite literal in that therapists will take clients out into nature. They will do nature walks for therapy. They will do equine therapy. There's so many forms of ecotherapy now. And what I'm presenting is that nature speaks to us through dreams and images, and that this imaginal world, um, the world of images, the world of soul, is also part of nature. And so it's quite extraordinary how somebody, for example, in a workshop, somebody was asking, "Where is home for me?" Because she hadn't been in a home of her own for years, and she felt quite destabilized. And many of us in this hyper electronic world that we're in feel like we've lost a sense of connection to earth and home. Anyway, she randomly picked a card, and the card was called home. And it was an image of this tree inside a forest. And she burst into tears, and she got in touch with home's always there in her connection to nature and in her connection to herself. So, imaginal ecotherapy is a way of being able to help clients get in touch with their deep internal connection to nature. And again, I can do that within the therapy room instead of taking them out.
Yes, and also at the same time, there is a trend from the higher ups to bring us all into the urban environment and even break us away even more from rural, from nature. They want to bring it or build and set up the 15-minute cities. There talks
Yes.
about creating 100-mile long cities in the desert. Now they shrank that to 1.5 miles. So is this tendency again to keep us uprooted and keeps us away from nature? And I witness such, maybe it's a small example, but parking spots around public forests are becoming less and less available because the city will say, if you park around this area, you're going to disturb this. These people who live close by. Said yes, but they live here permanently. We come only on the weekend. So why they can just bite the bullet and allow us to park the cars and it's public domain? No. So the city will put a no parking sign. So again, less and less people will enjoy the forest.
I think there's unfortunately so much pushback on well, both the awareness of climate change and sadly a way of really addressing it. But there's also so much pushback to this patriarchal perspective, which is a need to own, colonize, control nature, people. And I'm afraid that we're in a huge transition right now. We are in a huge transition, and I believe from what I'm seeing in my dreams, listening to other dreams, seeing what comes up in therapy, that there is actually a collapse of the patriarchy happening, but they're in a death grip. So they're fighting back with these kind of ideas. And so I hear what you're talking about is that need to control, just like the need to colonize and control nature, it's a need to control people. That doesn't happen actually in every country. I'm just thinking about how in England, um, there is something called open spaces, I think, where anybody has a right to trek across somebody else's property.
Hmm.
And these beautiful estates, which somebody owns, are available for anybody to hike. And there's an interesting balance between this idea of ownership and open space, which we don't have here. And yeah, I just think sadly we're up against a great deal of pushback. And for me, doing dream work and therapy is a bit of a revolution because you cannot control imagination. You cannot control psyche. Just to go back a little bit in history, um, there has been a history through um, throughout the Bible, throughout different biblical texts, including the Quran, of dreams being prophetic, dreams telling people what was going to happen in the future so that they have information and can prepare themselves. There's that very famous story of Joseph telling the Pharaoh what his dream meant, that 7 fat cows and then followed by 7 skinny cows meant that there would be 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of scarcity. And the Pharaoh was very wise to listen to a dream interpreter and take action and build up his surpluses over the next 7 years so that he could take care of his community. Dreams were used and have been used by many communities as a way of informing not only the individual, but the species, the collective. And then something happened. This beautiful understanding of dreams became reinterpreted in around the year 1000, um, I think with Thomas Aquinas, and it was reinterpreted as witchcraft. And the reason was that the church wanted to take control of dreams. They don't want people having direct access to a higher consciousness. But the truth is, dreams aren't going to hang out with just the power. We all dream. We all have this access. The same thing is true with therapy. We all have access to this divine intelligence. And so it's a bit revolutionary. It won't be colonized, or hopefully won't. And I think that I even have to be aware of that because it was a gift that was given to me. And I have to be aware not to try to colonize it on behalf of my income, my survival, importance.
Yes, as long as you
Yes.
don't want to, or you don't go to Peru and trying to impose your teachings onto the shamans, I think you're going to be fine. Or
Yeah,
to
that won't
Brazil, or
happen.
yeah, or to the Bushmen in Australia, I think you are going to be fine, and
Yeah,
will be respecting other people's wishes and lives and everything
yeah.
they do. And because you mentioned your dreams, now with the solar flares and the energies, bombarding Earth, do you feel different? Do you feel other channels opening for you that can bring more revelations?
That's so interesting. I never connected it to what is happening in space, but it's probably a good idea that I talk to uh, either scientist or a good astrologer to find out what has happened, because since 1997, I have been having big collective dreams. Many dreams of whales with many synchronicities. My big whale dream came at the same time as the Whale Rider came out in Australia, uh, no, New Zealand. And it came out also as a chapter in a book. And the same day that I was going to present the chapter in the book, there was a magazine article in the New York Times Magazine with a big heading that said, "Are whales trying to communicate with us?" And the dream was so powerful. It was so unlike any dream. And the message was that there is a chemical or solution at the end of the whale's tail that cures depression. I don't know how much we can get into that, but I was looking at that symbolically and in terms of my own family history, which has depression. I was looking at it in terms of the patriarchy having depression. But ultimately, I don't think we can just treat dreams as if they're symbols. I think that these are real communications. And I do believe the whales were trying to communicate with us. And I've continued to have these whale dreams, including, if it's okay to say something political, just before the 2016 election, where many of us expected Hillary to win and just sort of assumed that, I had the weekend before a um, terrific nightmare in which there was a great father whale dead at the bottom of aquarium, and a baby whale banging up against him, trying to wake him up and screaming. And I woke from the dream and I said, "There's something that's gone wrong. I don't know what it is, but something's gone terribly wrong. And um, this is the death of the great father." So the dreams do come to warn us. We may not always understand them. In 2012, I had a dream in which I was in the Empire State Building, and in the next moment, I was in the ocean underneath the Empire State Building, which was on stilts, and I saw a tsunami coming, and I knew that I would die, and I knew that the Empire State Building would be knocked over by the tsunami, and I thought, so this is what it is to die. If I close my eyes, it will all be peaceful. It's only the transition that is scary.
Mhm.
Well, I woke from that dream and I said, oh my God, this is the state of the empire. We are
Yes.
in an empire that is in a state of collapse. This is the tower archetype, the same archetype you find in tarot, which represents the collapse of established norms. And we can see the tower archetype happening again and again right now in our culture. 9/11 was a tower archetype. My dream's a tower archetype symbolically of the state of the empire collapsing. Donald Trump is a tower archetype. He has his name emboldened in gold on a tower. We're seeing these tower archetypes again and again. And so part of it is recognizing we're in a profound transition that is scary, but there's something beyond it. Again, if we can, I think about what was said about 9/11, which is that it was a failure of imagination. I think if we can stop failing in our imagination and begin to go look for what wants to be born out of what is cracking, we can sustain ourselves in a new way. There's a new world wanting to be born. But I will say it quite honestly, it's a scary transition.
Yes, it is. And I spoke with other guests, and they all said that, yes, it's scary, but at the end of, or on the other side, is going to be much better, easier for everyone, cleans humanity, because we need that. I mean, we look around us and we see how much decadence and depression, as you said, and trauma, and it's being maintained, it's not being addressed, and comes from the top down. It's not like the society suddenly got into this state. It was helped, it was induced in purpose for us to be dumbed down and not be able to interpret this dream or go beyond ancestral or personal trauma. So we need that cleansing at the top, and the reverberation will go to the bottom for sure.
Absolutely. I think that it is a call, a wake up call, just like nightmares are a wake up call for healing. This collective nightmare is a wake up call for healing. I also think, um, because I've seen with therapy and dreams that there is really no separation between our inner and outer worlds, um, between psyche and matter. These tools show us a non dualistic, a holistic way of being. And when I look at the polarizing that's happening right now, all over the world, so much polarizing. Polarizing is one of the symptoms also of a empire collapse, but it's also, to me, a symptom of a dualistic consciousness that is beginning to break apart. The center can't hold anymore right now, and we can see it in these ways in which it's pulling apart further and further. And I just see that as, oh, this is the old consciousness. Chaos always precedes a big transition. So again, I come back to how important it is that we're integrating science and ancient ways of knowing, mysticism, because I think we're moving toward a unified consciousness.
Yes, and even because I mentioned, Peru and sacred plant medicine, even this aspect is starting to be investigated in a controlled environment with psilocybin or ibogaine or even ayahuasca. So people realize that after one or two sessions, PTSD vanishes, or anywhere the psychic gets much more improvement than having chemicals being taken for 5 or 10 years and or for life. And certain
Yeah.
individuals, certain institutions are doing this type of research in a controlled environment.
Yes, it's really exciting. It's very, very exciting. And um, I think that we do understand the need to go beyond the consciousness of ordinary rational thinking. So we are turning to plant medicines, and it is incredibly exciting that psychology is breaking open. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I actually have gotten in.
no, please go ahead.
Well, I've connected with a group of ketamine physicians and psychedelic assisted therapists who are just wonderful. And I won't do it, I'm not trained in it, but I certainly feel very safe to refer clients to them. And what I see is that these are people that are, again, returning to ancient healing practices and bringing them into the current days. And they're courageous women, mostly women that I'm meeting. And one of them is a ketamine physician who got turned on to therapy. And she said therapy and ketamine are pretty much doing the same thing, which I didn't understand until we began to work together. And I trained her in therapy, and I trained a number of the group in therapy. And I can see what they're talking about, that there's a psychedelic um, opening of a psychedelic mind that happens when you're working with plant medicine. And it also happens when you're working with therapy or dream work, that you're working with a much larger consciousness.
Yes, and I recently interviewed Tricia Eastman. She's in the psychedelic field.
Mm.
She wrote books, and she's well known. And I asked her, I mean, she participated in one of the World Economic Forum sessions, and I asked her, just to clear your name, I was joking, in fact. I said, did they invite you, or you asked them to be present? And she said, they invited me, and I spoke in front of the young leaders and in front of other leaders as well. So that gives me hope that if she can change their mind and have them stay through such a ceremony, they will get transformed. And as soon as the older generations like Klaus Schwab and all the other cronies die out, then these new leaders will be able to change the world or stop doing the damage the predecessors started on us and on the world at whole.
That's a beautiful, beautiful, hopeful vision.
Yes. Laureen, you
Yeah,
wanted to share some pictures with us?
I'll be happy to. So, this was one of my early cases. Let me see if I can start to share it. So, a woman came in to see me who was in her 60s and who was very anxious about something to do with her sons, but she wasn't giving me any information. She was holding everything behind a very frozen smile. And I think she thought I was a tarot reader, so she just wanted me to tell her. But I asked her to pick a deck and then to pick a card. And this is the card that she picked for the problem. So the card on the left is the card that she picked to show the problem.
We cannot see
And
it
this,
yet. I cannot see it
okay,
yet.
this will,
Okay, now I can see it. Yes. Yeah.
got it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this card on the left is the card that she chose. It's from the Karma Tarot deck. The Karma Tarot deck was created in a hippie colony in Copenhagen. I just happen to know that history to it. But in any case, that's the card she picked. And I put the Rider Waite moon card on the right to give you an idea that if this was a traditional tarot reading, the Rider Waite deck would be the one that's used. And this is very typical. The symbols in the Rider Waite are very typical of almost all decks, where you're going to see this crab or lobster crawling up from the deep ocean,
Mhm.
and then you're going to see a dog and wolf, and then you're going to see two towers or two castles or two structures of some sort. And in the card that she chose, I'd used this deck before. I'd never noticed this. I've never seen this in any other deck. What jumped out at me were the wine bottles. So if an image attracts my attention, I'm going to assume that my intuitive unconscious has picked up something about the client and I will ask about it. And so I asked if there was a drinking problem in the family. And both sons were alcoholic and the husband had died of it. So there we were, right into the problem that she had been avoiding. And this is the kind of power that um, images have to bring up what is most pertinent to the unconscious. Um, I'll show you one other, which was a remarkable synchronicity. So I was running groups for psychotherapists. I was running dream groups to teach them dream work. And if somebody did not have a dream, I would invite them to do Tarotpy, which is like a dream with your eyes open. So this one very brilliant intern psychotherapist didn't have a dream. She agreed to do Tarotpy. I asked her to go inside, ask her unconscious how many cards she needed to look at. She said 7. How are they laid out? Like a body. What are the names of the placements? I'm not going to go into all of them, but the heart center, and I'm going to focus on the heart center. And then she picked a deck and she pulled cards randomly. And here was the card for the heart center. It's the card on the left. It comes from the New Age deck, which is German, called Neuzeit. Now, again, I use the Rider-Waite deck on the right as my control deck. I'm a scientist, so I want to say if she just picked from this deck, this is what it would look like. In most decks, the King of Swords is going to be in Renaissance garb and carrying a sword. And it's an older male figure. It's an authority figure. So, what might we be talking about? The group asked, is this about your boss? Is this about your father? She said, well, my father is my role model, and he's very close to my heart. So, this was her father showing up. But as you see in the left side card, here's a guy who's like a hip dude. He's got walkie talkies on. He's in the modern age. He's holding a missile. And he's got nuclear and atom written underneath the pedestal. And she said, oh, by the way, my dad is a nuclear scientist who works with the atom.
Wow.
So here we are dealing with her dad. And I want to say that these powerful synchronicities are in themselves very healing. I believe that images are very healing because we stimulate the unconscious, we stimulate imagination, and to animate the unconscious is to become more alive. So images themselves are healing, but synchronicity, those kind of powerful synchronicities, are a moment of being in the eternal now. It's a moment where we're not separate. And this was so powerful that when I called her 20 years later to say, I'd like to use your case, she said, you mean the one with my father who's a nuclear scientist? And I said, of course. But then the question came up, well, why did her father show up here in the reading? Why is he on her heart center? And we realized that as a training therapist, she needs to trust her emotional intelligence as much as her intellect, but having her father as her role model made her lean into her intellect most of the time. So I asked her if she wanted to move her father off her heart center because you can change the cards you're dealt. And she said no. But this therapy session stimulated a series of dreams in which her father moved next door. And she realized that she was finding a balance between her father and herself, her intellect and her heart. So, again, this very powerful session was something she never forgot. I never forgot either.
Interesting. Lorraine, thank you for sharing these 2 cases. Any other plans for the remaining of the year for you?
Yes, I am setting up a training at the end of July. It'll be the last Saturday of July. It's a 4-part training, so it'll be one Saturday a month from July, August, September, October. It'll finish before the holidays. It's a 4-hour training with breaks, so it turns into a 5-hour day. And I'm going to be training people as therapy practitioners and certifying them as therapy practitioners. It's open to psychotherapists who can get continuing education credits, but it's also open to lay people because I know that there's very gifted healers who are not licensed. And it's also a practice for oneself. this is my 40-year practice. It has changed my life. And so I offer it for people to learn a practice for themselves that can be a psychospiritual daily practice, weekly practice, and also for them to use professionally. What other plans? I'm getting together with a coach to teach me to videotape my webinars and really put my work out there. I'm actually rather shy and I fake it as an extrovert, but I'm an introvert. So I sort of need to get pushed to get out there and do podcasts. And thank you for making this so easy and delightful. Um, and I also need to be pushed to put my work out there. So I'm going to work with a coach to put the work out on YouTube and TikTok. And really, I need to. I feel like with what's happening in our world right now, I'm being asked internally to put the work out. And also my dreams. I also feel that I need to write a blog of what I've learned through dreams because of the big political dreams I've had and because dreams have guided my life. I feel like I need to offer that tool for others. And I also feel like we need to be in dialogue as communities about what are our dreams envisioning for this new world that you were talking about.
Yes, yeah, we have
So,
to do that. I mean, that was the
yes.
idea for me and a friend of mine, Kathy Mason, to organize the Co-Creative Awakening Summit in June, and we offer it for free. People could buy the bundle of free gifts offered by the guests, but other than that, they can just go and watch that all those sessions for free, because we know that there is a need for people to wake up, to better themselves, increase their consciousness, share with their friends about what's going on in the world, and this is the only way. Being in their face until they get tired of us and say, "Okay, let me watch it," because otherwise they will do Netflix or something else.
I will go find it and watch it. It sounds wonderful. And yes, I just so agree with you. We have to awaken ourselves and each other.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a continual practice because I believe every time there's a synchronicity, it's an awakening, but it doesn't always stick. Just like psychedelic voyage has to be integrated, and so I think we have to practice it over and over and over again. This new consciousness until it becomes fully embodied for us.
Indeed. Lorraine, what is your perception of God?
You do ask big questions. My sense is that there's a universal intelligence and that it's an extraordinary intelligence that we're all connected to, and that it also takes on different personas, that it can be seen like a diamond. So we see it through different facets. And we may see it then as a male god or a female god, or we may see it as a Christian god, monotheistic God, although I do see it as many facets, so I like the polyistic better. I love the Greek vision of gods. But I do see this as a universal intelligence that is all around us, and that whether you call it the force or dust or God or just weird, it's a connection that we have. And I believe that we often see it through synchronicities. We're getting a glimpse of this all oneness when we have extraordinary moments. And that's why I do a practice to help people have extraordinary moments. That's why I think the psychedelic. I believe that there is a God gene in all of us, and that's what we're needing to open up to. And I believe that's what plant medicines open us up to.
Yes.
I believe
I,
that's what ecotherapy can open us up to.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I recently had a discussion with Rabbi Judy Greenfeld, and she said I had
Mm.
a hard time accepting that God can be a she. And she comes from a Judaic perspective and background, and we had a very interesting conversation on all these religious subjects. But again, she made the point that it wasn't easy for her to take the patriarchal out of the God concept and replace it with a she, with the feminine.
Yes. I have to say, I'm also working on finding the feminine goddess in my meditations because as I've read the I Ching for 40 years, almost daily, I feel like I'm hearing an old sage, a monk, a master, but that this is a masculine voice and it teaches me. And this is kind of the father that I never really had. But it is a masculine voice. And so I am also bringing myself out of the patriarchal experience of God to the feminine. And I believe that's where we need to go,
Yes,
is to a
indeed.
feminine.
Yeah.
I will, if I could say one more dream, it's not
Please.
it's not an image, it's a phrase that I woke up with in 2015. And the phrase was, and I woke up in its entirety, when you see the four horsemen of the apocalypse coming, turn your eyes inward and start a new civilization in your belly.
Hmm, interesting.
I repeated it. When you see the four horsemen of the apocalypse coming, turn your eyes inward and start a new civilization in your belly. And I believe this is the new world you're talking about. And this is about the feminine helping to birth a new world in a equal relationship with the masculine.
Yes. And at the same time, if I look from a different angle, we know, or at
Please.
least some of us have the belief that there are certain civilizations inside the earth, and they can come outside at one point, revealing themselves, starting a new civilization after the reset.
I agree that that is possible.
Yeah.
And again, I'm just really inspired by your vision.
Thank you. Lorraine, we are at the end of the interview. Any final thoughts?
I just want to say I'm grateful to have this conversation and grateful that these conversations are really happening all over now and just want to join communities
Yes. Thank
and
you. Thank you
support
also. It's
them.
been lovely to have a chat with you and find out more about what you are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And to my viewers, thank you for watching. Share it, leave a comment, support us at www.spiritualinspired.ca. And until next time, love and gratitude.